day to you and welcome back to UK Insider. They say that in politics there are no permanent friends, only permanent interests, but frankly, they forgot to mention the third category, the disgruntled former employee who decides to burn the house down on their way out the door. If Sir Keir Starmer thought his biggest headache was the leader of the opposition or the looming spectre of economic stagnation, he was sorely mistaken. The call is coming from inside the house. Or rather, from someone who used to have the keys to the house, knew where the bodies were buried, and has now decided to hand a shovel to the British public. We are witnessing a spectacle so delicious, so chaotic, and so utterly damaging to the Prime Minister's credibility that it almost feels scripted by a satirist with a grudge. We are talking about a top-level betrayal, a clash of narratives that exposes the rot at the heart of Number 10, and a revelation that makes the government's top priorities look less like a strategy and more like a bad joke told at a dinner party that nobody wants to attend. The Prime Minister has been left scrambling, his authority shredded on live television, not by a political rival, but by his own former Director of Strategy. It is the political equivalent of your best man standing up at your wedding and announcing that you actually hate the bride. It is messy, it is brutal, and we absolutely need to talk about it. Quick favour, if you are loving this deep dive into the chaos of Westminster, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet. It is completely free, takes a second and means the world to us. Thanks. If you did. Now back to the show. So let us set the scene. The government has been taking a victory lap. They have been patting themselves on the back so vigorously they are at risk of dislocating a shoulder. The cause of this celebration, the release of Alaa Abdel Fattah, the Egyptian activist who arrived in London on Boxing Day. Sir Keir Starmer, with all the gravitas he could muster, looked into the cameras and declared that bringing this man to the United Kingdom has been a top priority for my government since we came to office. Top priority. Those are heavy words. They imply sleepless nights, emergency Cobra meetings, and the full weight of the British state being thrown behind a singular noble goal. You would imagine that in the strategy meetings at Number 10, amidst discussions about the crumbling NHS and the cost of living crisis, there was a big red circle around this man's name. But then enter Paul Ovenden. Paul Ovenden is not just some random intern who fetched the coffee. He was Sir Keir Starmer's Director of Strategy in Number 10 until September 2025. He was the man in the room. He was the guy who helped write the list of priorities. And what does he have to say about this top priority? He essentially laughed in the Prime Minister's face. In a move that can only be described as a career-ending kamikaze dive for his former boss, Ovenden publicly stated that Mr. Abdel Fattah's designation as a high priority came as a surprise to him. And why was he surprised? Because, as he dryly noted, until recently I was in a position of influence over the government's priorities. That is a polite British way of saying the Prime Minister is lying. Ovenden went further. He did not just say it wasn't a priority. He said the case had been a running joke in Whitehall. A joke. Let that sink in. While the Prime Minister is out there painting this as a triumph of diplomatic humanitarianism, his own strategy chief is telling us that behind closed doors, the people running the country were rolling their eyes at the sheer absurdity of it all. It strips away the veneer of competence and reveals a government that is disconnected from reality, driven not by the needs of the British people, but by, as Ovenden put it, celebrity letter-writing campaigns and activist lawyers. Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe this activist is a latter-day Nelson Mandela. Maybe he is worth the effort. That brings us to the second and arguably more explosive part of this saga. Because once you peel back the layers of this heroic activist's history, what you find is not a message of peace and love, but a catalogue of statements so vile they would make a hardened internet troll blush. We are told we should be celebrating the return of Alaa Abdel Fattah, but let us look at the CV of the man we have just spent immense diplomatic capital to retrieve. This is a man who has made a series of comments calling for the killing of police officers, not criticising them, not calling for reform, calling for them to be killed. He has called for the killing of Zionists. He has described British people, that is us, the people whose government just saved him, as dogs and monkeys. Yes, you heard that correctly. The government's top priority was securing the safety of a man who referred to the tax-paying citizens of this country as subhuman animals. And if that wasn't enough to make your blood boil, he also declared, "I'm a racist, I don't like white people," and urged rioters to burn down Downing Street. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. The Prime Minister has bent over backward to rescue a man who openly fantasised about burning down the very building the Prime Minister sleeps in. It is like a turkey voting for Christmas, or a homeowner handing a box of matches and a can of petrol to an arsonist while saying, "Welcome home, do make yourself comfortable." And this is where Paul Ovenden's comments become truly devastating. He described the obsession with this case as a totem of the ceaseless sapping of time and energy by people obsessed with fringe issues. He painted a picture of Whitehall that is both hilarious and terrifying. He spoke of clean-shirted diplomats and their scurrying auxiliaries who treated this case as a cause célèbre. This is the blob in action. This is the permanent civil service, the unelected machinery of state, focusing its immense power not on fixing the potholes in your road or getting the waiting lists down, but on pleasing the dinner party circuit of North London. Ovenden says they mentioned him with such regularity it became a running joke. Imagine the scene. You are trying to discuss how to get the economy growing, and some diplomat in a crisp shirt interrupts to ask, "Yes, but what about the man who wants to burn down our office? Have we helped him today?" It perfectly encapsulates the disconnect that so many people feel. The government seems to have an infinite capacity to worry about the approval of the Guardian's opinion page, but a very limited capacity to worry about the approval of the people in Doncaster or Derby. Ovenden calls it being captured by lobbying efforts. He points out that once you start noticing it, you see it everywhere. Small government departments too powerless to resist the pressure of the shouty minority. What makes this sting even more is the timeline of how we got here. We cannot let the Conservative Party off the hook entirely, much as they might like to scrub this from their Wikipedia page. Mr. Abdel Fattah was granted United Kingdom citizenship in December 2021. That was under Boris Johnson. He reportedly got it through his British-born mother. So the Tories opened the door, handed him a passport and essentially invited this problem into our living room. It is a bipartisan failure. The Tories gave him the status and Labour made him the main character. It is a tag team effort in national embarrassment. However, the political fallout right now lands squarely on Sir Keir Starmer's desk. When your own former director of strategy, a man who left only months ago, is openly mocking your narrative, you are in deep trouble. It suggests that Starmer is not in control of his own government. It suggests that he is being led by the nose by these activist lawyers and scurrying auxiliaries. The phrase running joke is going to haunt him. Every time Starmer stands up at the dispatch box and claims something is a priority, the opposition is going to ask, is this a real priority, Prime Minister, or is it another running joke? It undermines his authority completely. It makes him look like a supply teacher who thinks he is in charge while the kids are actually running the lesson. And let us look at the reaction from the current administration. Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper has done what politicians always do when they are caught with their trousers down. She has ordered a review. She said due diligence arrangements were completely inadequate and wants to ensure lessons are learned. Lessons are learned. Is there a phrase in the English language more infuriating than that? It is the bureaucratic equivalent of a shrug. It is what they say when a bridge collapses or a database is lost or they accidentally import a man who hates them. Oh well, lessons will be learned. The lesson should be fairly simple. Do not spend years of diplomatic effort rescuing someone who thinks you are a dog or a monkey. Write that on a post-it note and stick it on the fridge in number 10. Lesson learned. Job done. But they won't do that. Instead, we will have a 6-month inquiry, a glossy report and a committee meeting where everyone nods solemnly and agrees that procedures must be tightened, while the actual issue, the ideological capture of the state, goes unaddressed. Paul Ovenden's intervention is so significant because it breaks the omerta. Usually, advisors wait until the memoirs are published 10 years later to stick the knife in. To do it this soon, while the issue is still hot, suggests a level of frustration and perhaps a desire to distance himself from the wreckage. He is essentially saying, do not blame me for this nonsense. I told them it was a joke. He is washing his hands of the Starmer administration's priorities in public. It also raises the question, if the director of strategy thought this was a joke, who was actually pushing it? Who was the driving force? Ovenden points the finger at the clean-shirted diplomats, but the Prime Minister is the one who ultimately signs off. Starmer claimed it was his priority. So either Starmer was lying to make himself look virtuous to the activist crowd, or he was so out of the loop that he didn't realise his own staff were laughing at the policy. Neither option is particularly flattering. We are seeing a Prime Minister who is desperately trying to be all things to all people. He wants to be the tough-on-crime prosecutor, but he prioritises the release of a man who calls for killing police. He wants to be the patriotic leader, but he champions a man who hates the British people. He wants to be the serious technocrat, but his own technocrats are mocking him. The mask is slipping. The contradictions are becoming too heavy to hold together. This incident also shines a spotlight on the arm's-length bodies and the machinery of government that Ovenden mentioned. We often talk about the deep state in a conspiratorial whisper, but Ovenden is describing something very real and very mundane. He is describing a culture within the civil service that has its own values, its own priorities, and its own heroes, largely independent of what the elected government or the voters actually want. They are the ones who keep the celebrity letter-writing campaigns on the top of the pile, while the letters from struggling pensioners get lost in the filing cabinet. Starmer's explosion on live TV, whether it is a literal outburst of anger or the metaphorical explosion of his narrative, is the result of this tension. You cannot ride two horses at once. You cannot appease the radical fringe while trying to govern a sensible centre. Eventually, you do the splits, and it is painful to watch. The British public is not stupid. We know when we are being sold a pup. We know that when the Prime Minister tells us something is a top priority, and then we find out the beneficiary is a guy who wants to burn down Downing Street, something has gone strictly wrong. We are tolerant people. We believe in justice. We believe in fair trials. But we also believe in a bit of common sense. And the common sense verdict on this is that the government has been taken for a ride. What is fascinating is that Ovenden is not a right-wing shock jock. He was Labour's Director of Communications. He is one of them. This is friendly fire. And friendly fire is always the deadliest because you don't see it coming. It validates every criticism the right has been making about the Labour government being out of touch and obsessed with woke causes. When your own strategy director sounds like a columnist for The Telegraph, you have lost the narrative war. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a Prime Minister who looks weak. It leaves us with a Foreign Office that looks captured. And it leaves us with a new British citizen who hates us. Welcome to 2026 politics. The pacing is frantic, the plot is absurd, and the characters are increasingly unbelievable. This surely has to be a wake-up call for Starmer. He needs to get a grip on his own administration. He needs to decide who is actually running the country. Is it him, or is it the scurrying auxiliaries in Whitehall? If he doesn't answer that question soon, the voters will answer it for him, and they won't be polite about it. One has to wonder what the conversation was like in Number 10 the morning Overden's comments dropped. I imagine the air turned blue. The sheer embarrassment of having your top priority debunked as a running joke is the kind of thing that topples governments, not overnight, but by 1,000 cuts. It chips away at the authority. It turns the leader into a figure of fun. And once the public starts laughing at you, it is very, very hard to get them to stop. We will be watching closely to see how Starmer tries to spin his way out of this one. Will he double down? Will he throw another advisor under the bus? Or will he just hope that something else explodes next week to distract us? Given the current track record, I wouldn't bet against the latter. Thank you very much for watching. We shall see you in the next one.